The Great South African Cash-in-Transit Heist, a complete chronicle. In the sprawling industrial heartland of Johannesburg, where mining wealth had carved deep veins through the earth and society alike, a different kind of extraction was being planned. The year was 2006, and South Africa's cash-in-transit industry had become both a necessity and a target. With limited banking infrastructure reaching the townships and a cash-dependent economy, armored vehicles crisscrossed the country daily, carrying millions of rand in a deadly game of financial Russian roulette. The Fidelity Guards depot in Rosettenville stood like a fortress of concrete and steel, its walls designed to withstand everything from small arms fire to explosive devices. Inside, on any given day, tens of millions of rand waited in reinforced vaults before being distributed across Gauteng province. It was here that one of the most audacious heists in South African criminal history would unfold. The architecture of ambition. The plan began not in the shadowy corners of Johannesburg's underworld, but in the mind of a man who understood the system from within. Colin Chalk, a former security guard who had worked for various cash-in-transit companies, possessed something invaluable: intimate knowledge of their vulnerabilities. His years of employment had been a reconnaissance mission he hadn't initially intended. But every shift had revealed another weakness in what appeared to be an impenetrable system. Chalk was no ordinary criminal. Soft-spoken and methodical, he approached the heist with the precision of a military operation. His notebooks, later discovered by police, contained detailed schematics of security systems, guard rotation schedules, and timing sequences that read like a doctoral thesis in criminal methodology. Recruiting the perfect crew, the recruitment process took nearly 8 months. Chalk needed specialists, men who could handle explosives, disable alarm systems, and most crucially, individuals who could maintain absolute silence. He found them in unexpected places. Themba Nolovu, an electrician from Alexandra Township, had struggled with unemployment for 3 years. His expertise with electrical systems made him indispensable for disabling the facility's sophisticated alarm network. What Chalk saw in Nolovu wasn't just technical skill, but desperation refined into determination. Johannes Mthembu brought military precision to the operation. Former member of Umkhonto, we sized during the anti-apartheid struggle, Mthembu had transitioned poorly to civilian life. His knowledge of explosives and tactical operations filled a crucial gap in Chalk's planning. The fourth member, Lucky Sibeko, was perhaps the most crucial. A mechanic with an intimate understanding of armored vehicle construction, Sibeko had spent years repairing the very trucks they intended to rob. His garage in Soweto became their unofficial headquarters, where stolen vehicle modifications were disguised as routine maintenance work. What made this crew exceptional was their intelligence network. Over 18 months, they cultivated sources within the cash-in-transit industry. Security guards struggling with low wages became inadvertent informants, sharing shift schedules in exchange for small favors. Cleaning staff provided floor plans. Even a cafeteria worker contributed by reporting which days carried the heaviest cash loads. Chalk's genius lay in making these relationships appear natural. He never asked direct questions. Instead, he built genuine friendships, attending funerals, helping with family problems, becoming a trusted figure in communities where trust was scarce. The intelligence flowed naturally through these relationships, surveillance and pattern recognition. The Fidelity Depot operated on a schedule so precise it bordered on mechanical. Every Tuesday and Thursday, between 2:47 a.m. and 3:23 a.m., the facility experienced what the crew termed the golden window, a 36-minute period. When security protocols created their only vulnerability, during these windows, armored trucks returned from rural routes, heavy with cash from weekend collections. The facility's policy required all vehicles to be unloaded before the next shift arrived, creating a period when the loading bay doors remained open longer than usual. More critically, the electronic surveillance system underwent its weekly diagnostic cycle during this window, creating brief blind spots in coverage. The crew spent months documenting these patterns. Using a rented apartment overlooking the facility, they photographed guard movements, timed electronic sequences, and mapped the facility's defensive geography. Their surveillance photos, later found by investigators, showed an obsessive attention to detail. Even shadows cast by security lighting were measured and recorded. The technical reconnaissance. Sibeko's mechanical expertise proved invaluable in understanding the facility's physical vulnerabilities. The building's loading bay, designed to accommodate large armored trucks, featured reinforced steel doors that operated on hydraulic systems. However, the hydraulic lines ran through an accessible utility corridor that connected to the building's main electrical system. During a carefully orchestrated visit, Siboko posed as a contractor bidding on maintenance work. He discovered that the facility's backup power system had a critical flaw. The emergency generators, designed to maintain security during power outages, had an 8-second delay before activation. 8 seconds of complete electrical failure during which all electronic security measures would be offline. The reconnaissance visit required weeks of preparation. Siboko created a legitimate contracting business, complete with business registration letterhead and a convincing portfolio of previous work. He studied the facility's maintenance history through municipal records, identifying genuine issues that would justify a contractor's visit. When he arrived for his consultation, he carried legitimate diagnostic equipment and spoke knowledgeably about hydraulic systems and building maintenance. During the 90-minute visit, Siboko photographed critical areas using a camera concealed in his toolkit. He measured door thicknesses, recorded serial numbers of security equipment, and most crucially, traced the path of utility lines through the building's infrastructure. His mechanical training allowed him to identify load-bearing walls versus partition walls. Crucial information for planning their explosive entry without risking structural collapse. The facility's security manager, impressed by Siboko's apparent expertise, even provided him with building blueprints to help with his assessment. These blueprints, officially classified as security-sensitive documents, revealed details about the vault's construction, emergency exit routes, and the exact specifications of the reinforced barriers they would need to breach. Ndelove's electrical expertise allowed them to map the facility's entire power grid from external access points. Using city maintenance records and utility maps, he identified the specific transformer that served the depot. More importantly, he discovered that disabling this transformer would immediately trigger alerts at the central monitoring station. The system was designed to tolerate brief power fluctuations common in Johannesburg's unstable electrical grid. Ndelove's electrical reconnaissance was equally methodical. Working as a legitimate electrician during the day, he gained access to city utility maps that showed the underground cable routes serving the industrial area. He traced the power supply from the main substation through 3 intermediate transformers to the specific unit that served the Fidelity Depot. The critical discovery came when Ndlove accessed maintenance records showing that the depot's electrical system experienced routine fluctuations during peak demand periods. The monitoring system was programmed to ignore power disruptions lasting less than 15 seconds, assuming they were normal grid fluctuations. This tolerance window would provide crucial cover for their operation. Through careful observation of utility company maintenance procedures, Ndlove learned that transformer maintenance was routine and rarely investigated unless the outage lasted more than 30 minutes. He observed actual maintenance crews to understand their procedures, timing, and equipment, allowing him to plan an intervention that would appear completely normal to any casual observer. The explosive solution. Mthembu's military background brought a sobering realism to their planning. He recognized that despite their intelligence gathering, unexpected complications were inevitable. His solution was an overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. The explosives plan involved 3 charges: a small device to disable the external transformer, a shaped charge to breach the loading bay's secondary barrier, and a final explosive that would create an escape route through the facility's rear wall. Each charge was carefully calculated to achieve maximum effect, while minimizing the risk of structural collapse that could trap them inside. Mthembu's explosive calculations required weeks of precise preparation. Using his military engineering knowledge, he created detailed diagrams showing the exact placement, timing, and force requirements for each charge. The transformer charge needed to be small enough to appear accidental, but powerful enough to ensure complete power disruption. The loading bay charge required shaped explosive focusing to penetrate reinforced steel without creating excessive debris that might block their entry. The most complex calculation involved the escape route charge. Mthembu needed to breach the rear wall without compromising the building's structural integrity or alerting nearby facilities. Using construction blueprints obtained through Siboko's reconnaissance, He identified a section of wall that was non-load bearing and positioned away from critical infrastructure. Each explosive device was handcrafted using materials acquired over months from different sources. Mthembu never purchased more than small quantities of any component from a single supplier, and he spread his acquisitions across different cities to avoid creating patterns. The devices were assembled in a workshop he established in an abandoned mine shaft outside Johannesburg, where the sound of testing wouldn't attract attention. Acquiring the explosives required delicate navigation of Johannesburg's underworld. Kamelbu's contacts from his military days had evolved into a network of former combatants who struggled with civilian life. Some had turned to mining, where access to explosives was routine. Others worked in construction, where demolition charges were common tools. Through careful cultivation of these relationships, Mthembu assembled his arsenal over 6 months, never acquiring more than small quantities from any single source. The most dangerous acquisition was the detonation equipment. Military-grade detonators were heavily controlled, but Mthembu discovered that older, less sophisticated devices were sometimes discarded during mine closures. He spent weeks exploring abandoned mining operations around Johannesburg, recovering discarded equipment that could be refurbished for his purposes. Testing the explosive devices required extreme caution. Mthembu established a testing site in an abandoned quarry outside Pretoria, where he could conduct small-scale tests without attracting attention. Each component was tested individually before being incorporated into the final devices. The testing process revealed that his calculations were accurate, but it also showed that the explosive effects would be more intense than anticipated, requiring modifications to their entry procedures. Final preparations. As 2006 drew to a close, the crew's preparation entered its final phase. They had identified December 28th as their target date, a Thursday night when holiday schedules would reduce security personnel and police response times would be compromised by skeleton staffing. The approach route was meticulously planned. Starting from Sabako's garage in Soweto, they would travel along secondary roads to avoid traffic cameras. Reaching the depot from the industrial area's less monitored eastern approach, their vehicle, a stolen Toyota Hilux, modified with reinforced panels and stolen license plates, had been tested on practice runs that simulated every aspect of their approach except the actual crime. The Toyota Hilux had been selected after months of research into optimal escape vehicles. Chalk had studied police pursuit procedures and emergency response patterns, determining that a common commercial pickup truck would attract less attention than exotic vehicles while providing the durability needed for their operation. The vehicle was stolen from a construction site in Pretoria, chosen specifically because construction vehicles often went unreported missing for days. Sabako's modifications to the Hilux were extensive and sophisticated. The engine was tuned for maximum performance with upgraded suspension to handle high-speed driving with heavy loads. Reinforced panels were welded to protect against small arms fire, while the fuel tank was expanded to eliminate the need for refueling during their escape. The modifications were disguised to appear like standard commercial upgrades, making the vehicle invisible among legitimate work trucks. The license plate system involved 3 sets of plates that could be changed quickly during different phases of their operation. The initial plates belonged to a similar vehicle registered in Cape Town, creating confusion if the vehicle was spotted during their approach. The second set was completely fabricated, designed to delay identification if the vehicle was reported during the crime. The final set belonged to a vehicle that had been scrapped, providing legitimate registration data that would pass casual inspection. Equipment procurement had been spread across months and multiple sources. Wire cutters, hydraulic jacks, portable cutting torches, and communication equipment were acquired piece by piece, never creating a pattern that might attract attention. Even their clothing was carefully considered. Dark coveralls that wouldn't reflect light, soft-soled shoes that wouldn't create noise, and balaclavas that were individually purchased from different stores across the city. The communication equipment represented one of their most sophisticated preparations. Chalk had researched police radio frequencies and emergency service protocols, acquiring scanner equipment that would allow them to monitor response activities during and after their operation. Each crew member carried a radio programmed with multiple frequencies, allowing them to coordinate their activities while monitoring potential threats. The tools were selected based on extensive research into safe cracking and barrier penetration techniques. Chalk had studied locksmithing manuals and consulted with legitimate security professionals under the guise of improving security at his workplace. The hydraulic equipment was acquired through a complex transaction involving a supposedly failed construction project, providing legitimate justification for purchasing heavy-duty tools. Timing devices for the explosives were the most challenging component to acquire. Mthembu needed precision timing mechanisms that would coordinate multiple explosive charges while providing sufficient delay for safe positioning. Military surplus dealers provided some components, while others were fabricated using commercial timing devices modified for their specific requirements. The psychological preparation. What separated this crew from typical smash-and-grab criminals was their psychological preparation. Chalk insisted on mental rehearsals where they visualized every possible complication. They practiced their roles until responses became automatic, anticipating everything from guard resistance to equipment failure. Mthembu, drawing from his military experience, introduced stress inoculation exercises. They practiced their plan under artificially induced pressure. Loud music, bright lights, artificial time pressure, until they could execute their roles while maintaining clear thinking under stress. The crew also established contingency protocols for various failure scenarios. If caught during entry, their story would be that they were responding to a false alarm triggered by electrical problems. If discovered during the robbery, they had planned surrender procedures designed to minimize violence. Separated during escape, they had individual extraction routes and communication protocols. Final assembly. The crew gathered at Sibako's garage as Johannesburg settled into its post-holiday quiet. The city's rhythm had slowed, creating the perfect environment for their operation. Final equipment checks revealed months of preparation crystallizing into readiness. Communication radios were tested and synchronized. Tools were arranged in the precise order they would be needed. Each man reviewed his role one final time. Chalk, ever the methodical leader, conducted a final intelligence check. Phone calls to their sources confirmed that holiday schedules were in effect. Security staffing was reduced and police response units were operating with minimal crews. Weather conditions were ideal. Overcast skies would provide natural darkness, while the absence of rain meant their explosives would function reliably. The modified Toyota Hilux moved through Johannesburg's industrial arteries like blood through veins. Chalk drove with the careful attention of someone who understood that the slightest traffic violation could unravel months of planning. Their route avoided main thoroughfares, using a combination of service roads and industrial access routes that their reconnaissance had identified as minimally monitored. Dendlovu monitored police radio frequencies using a scanner modified to track multiple bands simultaneously. The sparse chatter confirmed their intelligence about reduced holiday staffing. Lucky Sabako sat in the back, mentally reviewing the facility's layout one final time, while Mthembu checked his explosive devices with the calm precision of a professional. They reached their final staging position, an abandoned service station 800 meters from the Fidelity Depot. From here, they could observe the facility while remaining invisible to its security systems. The next hour would be spent in careful observation, confirming that their target maintained its expected patterns despite the holiday schedule. The depot appeared exactly as their intelligence had predicted. Security lighting created predictable shadow patterns, guard movements followed documented routines, and the electronic surveillance system displayed its familiar operational rhythm. Most crucially, the loading bays showed signs of preparation for the expected armored truck arrivals. With 17 minutes remaining before their target window, final preparations began in earnest. Equipment was distributed according to predetermined assignments. Communication protocols were confirmed. Each man took his position for the approach phase. Chalk's leadership during these final moments revealed why the crew had followed him this far. His calm presence provided stability as adrenaline began affecting the others. His quiet confidence suggested that everything they had planned would proceed exactly as rehearsed. Penetration. Ndlovu's 18 months of electrical reconnaissance culminated in a moment of surgical precision. Transformers serving the Fidelity Depot stood in a service alley, protected by nothing more than a chain-link fence and warning signs. His modified circuit jumper, carefully crafted to simulate an equipment failure rather than sabotage, was attached and activated in less than 90 seconds. The circuit jumper was a masterpiece of electrical engineering disguised as equipment failure. and Delovu had constructed the device using components that would appear to be normal electrical failures if discovered during subsequent investigation. The device created a controlled overload that would trip safety systems while leaving physical evidence. Consistent with equipment malfunction rather than sabotage, the installation process required in Delovu to cut through the fence surrounding the transformer, attach the device to specific contact points, and activate a timer that would trigger the overload at precisely the moment when his colleagues were positioned for entry. The entire process was practiced dozens of times at similar transformers in abandoned industrial areas until Delovu could complete the installation in complete darkness using only his sense of touch. The timing mechanism was synchronized with watches carried by all crew members, ensuring that the power failure would occur at the exact moment when their entry team was positioned at the loading bay. The device was designed to fail safely if the timing was incorrect, preventing accidental activation that might alert security personnel before the crew was ready. The depot's lights flickered once, then died completely. Emergency lighting activated immediately. But the critical 8-second delay before backup power restoration created exactly the window they needed. During those 8 seconds, every electronic lock, alarm sensor, and surveillance camera was offline. Most importantly, the central monitoring system registered the outage as equipment failure rather than a security breach. The power failure created a cascade of effects that the crew had anticipated and planned for. Emergency lighting reduced visibility while creating dramatic shadows that would complicate any security response. The electronic locks defaulted to their fail-safe positions, some locking more securely while others released completely. The surveillance system began its restart sequence, creating a predictable pattern of system activation that the crew could exploit. Breach protocol initiated. Mthembu's shaped charge detonated against the loading bay, a secondary barrier with a sound like thunder compressed into a whisper. The explosion was precisely calculated, powerful enough to breach the reinforced steel, but contained enough to avoid alerting distant neighbors. Smoke and debris filled the loading bay as the crew moved through the gap with practiced efficiency. The shaped charge had been positioned during their approach using intelligence gathered during Saibako's reconnaissance visit. The explosive was placed against a specific weak point in the barrier's construction. Reinforcing beams created a structural vulnerability that could be exploited with minimal explosive force. The charge was shaped using a copper cone that focused the explosive energy into a narrow jet capable of penetrating reinforced steel. The explosion created a hole precisely 18 inches in diameter, large enough for the crew to pass through quickly, but small enough to avoid compromising the barrier's overall structural integrity. The debris pattern was controlled using canvas shields that directed fragments away from their entry path, ensuring they could move through the breach immediately after detonation. The timing of the explosion was coordinated with the power failure occurring during the window when security systems were offline. However, the crew knew that backup power would restore some security functions within seconds, requiring immediate movement through the breach before electronic systems came back online. The facility's interior layout matched their intelligence exactly. Emergency lighting cast red shadows through corridors they had memorized from stolen blueprints. Sabako led them through the maze of storage areas toward the main vault, his intimate knowledge of the building's architecture proving invaluable in the low light conditions. Navigation through the facility required moving along predetermined routes that avoided emergency lighting and potential surveillance camera positions. Each crew member had memorized multiple route options, allowing them to adapt if their primary path was blocked or compromised. The routes were designed to minimize time exposure, while avoiding areas where their presence might trigger remaining security systems. The interior temperature was significantly warmer than the exterior, creating condensation on their equipment that required constant management. The crew had anticipated this issue and prepared equipment covers and moisture-absorbing materials. 2. Prevent electronic malfunctions during the operation. The main vault presented their greatest technical challenge. Unlike the external barriers, this obstacle required both explosive and mechanical solutions. Mthembu's final charge was shaped to breach the vault door's locking mechanism without destroying the contents, while Saibako's hydraulic equipment would force the door once the locks were disabled. The vault door was a sophisticated barrier designed to resist both explosive and mechanical attack. The locking mechanism involved multiple steel bolts that extended into reinforced frames, creating a barrier that required precise explosive placement to disable without triggering defensive measures that would permanently seal the vault. Mthembo's approach involved two small-shaped charges placed against specific points in the locking mechanism. The charges were designed to sever the mechanical linkages between the lock controls and the steel bolts, effectively disabling the security system without destroying the door itself. The placement required precision measured in millimeters, as any deviation might either fail to breach the locks or trigger the vault's defensive lockdown system. The hydraulic equipment brought by Cyberco included portable jacks and spreaders designed for automotive rescue operations. These tools could generate tremendous force in compact packages, making them ideal for forcing the vault door once the locking mechanism was disabled. The equipment was positioned before the explosive charges were detonated, allowing immediate application of mechanical force once the locks were breached. The explosion echoed through the facility's corridors like a gunshot in a cathedral. For several seconds afterward, the only sound was falling debris and the hiss of hydraulic pressure being released. Then the vault door swung open, revealing stacks of cash that represented months of careful planning finally bearing fruit. The vault interior was exactly as described in their intelligence reports. Cash was organized in bundles arranged on steel shelving with different denominations separated into distinct sections. The organization was designed for efficient processing by legitimate personnel, but it also facilitated rapid selection by the crew, who could quickly identify and prioritize the most valuable bundles. The vault's ventilation system had been disabled by the power failure, creating an increasingly warm environment that threatened to overheat both equipment and personnel. The crew had prepared for this contingency with portable ventilation equipment, but time pressure made extended operation in the vault extremely uncomfortable. Inside the vault, organized chaos replaced careful planning. Cash was loaded into reinforced bags with the efficiency of a bank operation in reverse. Chalk had estimated they would find between 8 and 12 million rand, based on their intelligence about holiday collection schedules. The reality exceeded their most optimistic projections. Nearly 16 million rand in various denominations filled the vault's steel shelves. The loading process revealed the crew's preparation and teamwork. Each man knew exactly which denominations to prioritize and how to maximize the value-to-weight ratio of their theft. Smaller bills were abandoned in favor of larger denominations. Coins were ignored entirely. Within 8 minutes, they had loaded their bags with over 14 million rand. The cash selection process had been rehearsed using mock setups that replicated the vault's organization. Each crew member had specific responsibilities. Chalk supervised and maintained security watch, and Delovu handled the largest denomination bundles. Cyberco managed the heavy bags and transportation, and Mpembu provided security and monitored their timeline. The bags themselves were military surplus duffel bags reinforced with additional straps and padding to handle the weight of cash bundles. Each bag was pre-marked with weight limits to prevent overloading that might slow their escape. The bags were also treated with scent-masking compounds to prevent detection by police dogs during potential pursuit. Quality control during the loading process involved rapid assessment of bundle authenticity and condition. The crew had been trained to identify counterfeit currency and damaged bills that might be tracked more easily. Only genuine, undamaged currency in good condition was selected, ensuring that their stolen funds would be easily negotiable. The physical demands of moving millions of rand in cash had been underestimated during planning. Currency bundles were heavier and more awkward to handle than anticipated, requiring constant repositioning to maintain balance and mobility. The crew's physical conditioning, which had included weight training specifically for this operation, proved crucial during the loading phase. Egress under pressure, their escape route required one final explosive breach, a hole through the facility's rear wall that would allow them to avoid the main entrances where security cameras were most concentrated. Ethembo's final charge had been positioned during their entry, timed to detonate as they completed their vault robbery. The rear wall explosion was the most dangerous part of their operation, as it would be visible and audible to anyone in the surrounding area. The charge was shaped to create a hole just large enough for their escape, while minimizing the explosive signature that might alert distant observers. The timing was critical. Too early, and they would alert security before completing their robbery. Too late, and they might be trapped if emergency responders arrived. The positioning of the escape charge required careful calculation of the building's structural engineering. The wall needed to be breached without compromising the building's stability or creating debris that would block their exit path. Mthembu had selected a section of wall that was non-load-bearing and positioned away from critical utilities that might create additional hazards if damaged. The rear wall explosion created a gap large enough for rapid exit, while avoiding structural damage that might compromise the building's stability. They emerged into the industrial area behind the depot, where their modified Toyota waited in darkness. The total time inside the facility had been 16 minutes, well within their planned 20-minute maximum. The exit required immediate transition from stealth to speed. Once outside the building, their priority shifted from avoiding detection to rapid evacuation from the area. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, loading their bags into the Toyota while maintaining awareness of potential observers or security response. The Toyota's engine had been kept running during the entire operation, with the vehicle positioned for immediate departure. The escape route had been planned to avoid areas where the explosion might have attracted attention, using industrial roads that would mask the sound of their departure among routine commercial traffic. The vanishing act, the escape from the immediate area, required the same precision that had characterized their entry. Chalk drove with deliberate calm, avoiding the natural impulse to speed that had undone many successful robberies. Their predetermined route led through industrial areas where late-night traffic was common, making their vehicle invisible among legitimate commercial activity. The escape route had been mapped using multiple reconnaissance drives conducted over several months. Each turn, traffic light, and potential bottleneck had been identified and analyzed. Alternative routes were prepared for various contingencies, including police roadblocks, traffic accidents, or unexpected construction. The primary route avoided main thoroughfares and areas with heavy surveillance camera coverage. The Toyota's modified suspension handled the weight of the cash bags without obvious sagging that might attract attention. However, the additional weight affected the vehicle's handling characteristics, requiring Chalk to adjust his driving style to maintain normal appearance. The crew had practiced driving with simulated loads to prepare for these handling changes. Communication during the escape phase was maintained through hand signals and predetermined verbal codes that mimicked normal conversation to anyone monitoring police scanners. The crew avoided using their radio equipment during the initial escape phase to prevent any possibility of triangulation by emergency services. Ndlovu monitored emergency frequencies as police and security response units began mobilizing. The first patrol units wouldn't arrive at the depot for another 12 minutes, giving them crucial time to reach their secondary staging area. More importantly, the initial reports described an explosion rather than a robbery, buying them additional time as responders prepared for the wrong type of emergency. The police radio chatter revealed that initial reports were confused and contradictory. Some witnesses reported explosions, others reported power outages, and still others reported suspicious vehicle activity. The confusion was exactly what the crew had hoped for. Multiple conflicting reports that would delay coordinated response while they escaped the immediate area. The timing of emergency response had been calculated based on extensive study of police deployment patterns and response times. The crew had monitored police radio frequencies for months, learning the typical response procedures for different types of incidents. They knew that the complexity of their crime would require specialized units that would take additional time to mobilize and deploy. The shell game begins. At an abandoned warehouse in Germiston, the crew executed the first phase of their laundering operation. The stolen Toyota was driven into the building, where Cyberco had prepared a second vehicle, a legitimate delivery truck, complete with proper registration and commercial markings. The cash was transferred, the Toyota was doused with accelerant, and within minutes, evidence of their escape vehicle was reduced to twisted metal and ash. The warehouse had been selected after months of searching for a location that provided complete concealment, while remaining accessible and conspicuous. The building had been abandoned for over a year following the closure of a textile manufacturing business, but utilities remained connected and the structure was sound. Most importantly, the location was isolated enough to prevent observation, while remaining close enough to major roads for quick access. Preparation of the warehouse had required several months of careful work. Cyberco had installed lighting, ventilation, and the specialized equipment needed for their vehicle switch. The facility was stocked with supplies, including the second vehicle, spare license plates, tools for destroying evidence, and emergency equipment in case of complications. The delivery truck was a stolen vehicle that had been professionally modified to appear completely legitimate. New paint, commercial signage, and proper registration documents made it invisible among the thousands of similar vehicles operating throughout Johannesburg. The truck's cargo area was modified with hidden compartments that could conceal the cash bags during transport. The destruction of the Toyota was accomplished using thermite charges that would eliminate any forensic evidence while creating a fire. Pattern consistent with accidental electrical failure, the intense heat would destroy fingerprints, DNA evidence, and any trace materials that might connect the vehicle to the crew. The timing of the destruction was calculated to ensure complete evidence elimination, while avoiding a fire large enough to attract immediate attention. The delivery truck emerged from the warehouse carrying what appeared to be legitimate cargo. Their insurance against roadblocks and random police checks was a perfectly forged manifest. Describing bathroom fixtures bound for a construction site in Pretoria, the cash, packed in boxes labeled as ceramic tiles, would pass casual inspection by anyone who didn't specifically know what they were seeking. The manifest was supported by a complete paper trail, including purchase orders, shipping documents, and delivery instructions that would satisfy any routine inspection. The ceramic tile boxes were weighted and sealed to match genuine products, while the commercial signage on the truck matched legitimate business that could be verified through public records. Dissolution. The crew separated at a pre-planned intersection in Benone. Each man carried a portion of the cash and specific instructions for the next phase of their operation. They would not meet again for 72 hours, during which time each would establish his alibi and begin the careful process of converting stolen cash into legitimate assets. The separation point had been chosen for maximum invisibility, an industrial intersection where multiple roads converged, creating natural reasons for vehicles to arrive from different directions and depart to different destinations. The timing was calculated to coincide with shift changes at nearby factories, creating cover traffic that would mask their departures. Each crew member's share of the cash was carefully calculated and packaged for individual transport. The division was based on predetermined percentages that reflected each man's contribution to the operation, with Chalk receiving the largest share as the mastermind and organizer. The packaging was designed to appear like legitimate personal belongings that could be transported without attracting attention. The individual escape plans were as carefully crafted as the original robbery. Each man had prepared safe houses, alternative identities, and cover stories that would account for their activities during the crucial 72-hour period following the crime. These preparations had been developed independently to prevent any single member's capture from compromising the others. Chalk's planning had anticipated this moment with the same precision. He had applied to the robbery itself. Each crew member had a carefully constructed cover story for their whereabouts, supported by planted evidence and prepared witnesses. They would spend the next 3 days living their normal lives while the investigation began, confident that their preparation had made them invisible. The individual alibis were sophisticated constructions involving multiple witnesses, documentary evidence, and verifiable activities that would place each man far from the crime scene during the crucial period. These alibis had been established through legitimate activities conducted over several weeks, creating authentic evidence trails that would satisfy police investigations. Communication protocols for the separation period involved no direct contact between crew members, but included predetermined signals that could be used to warn of danger or coordinate emergency responses. These protocols were designed to maintain operational security while providing safety nets if individual situations became compromised. The cash distribution included emergency funds that each member could access if their primary laundering plans failed or if they needed to flee quickly. These emergency reserves were hidden in separate locations and could be accessed without compromising the other's security or revealing the main cash stashes. The investigation unfolds. Detective Captain Sarah McGale arrived at the Fidelity Depot as the sun rose over Johannesburg's industrial landscape. What she found challenged her 15 years of experience investigating cash-in-transit robberies. This wasn't the typical smash-and-grab operation that characterized most such crimes. The precision of the explosions, the surgical nature of the entry, and the complete absence of unnecessary destruction suggested a level of sophistication that elevated this case into an entirely different category. The crime scene told a story of meticulous planning and professional execution. The shaped charges had been placed with mathematical precision, achieving maximum effect while minimizing collateral damage. Tool marks on the vault suggested the use of professional-grade hydraulic equipment. Most telling of all, the perpetrators had left no unnecessary evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA traces, no carelessly discarded equipment. Mogali's first challenge was reconstructing the timeline. The depot's security system had recorded the power failure, but the 8-second gap in surveillance coverage had eliminated the most crucial evidence. Witness interviews in the surrounding industrial area yielded little useful information. The explosion had occurred during the dead hours when legitimate businesses were closed and residential areas were too distant to provide reliable observations. The investigation team's initial focus was on the power failure. Municipal records confirmed that the transformer failure appeared to be an equipment malfunction rather than sabotage, but the timing was suspiciously convenient. Electrical forensics specialists were brought in to examine the transformer, where they discovered Ndlovu's modification device, a sophisticated piece of equipment that simulated natural failure while actually causing deliberate disruption. Within 48 hours, the investigation had developed its first major theory. This had to be an inside job. The precision of the operation, the intimate knowledge of security procedures, and the perfect timing all suggested that someone with detailed knowledge of the facility had provided crucial intelligence. Oh golly. Began the painstaking process of interviewing everyone with access to the depot. Current employees, former employees, contractors, cleaning staff, and even delivery personnel were questioned extensively. Background checks were expanded and deepened. Financial records were examined for signs of unusual activity or sudden wealth. The investigation team created a complex matrix of access, opportunity, and capability. They identified 17 individuals with sufficient knowledge to plan such an operation. 12 with the necessary access to gather intelligence, and 7 with both factors, plus indicators of possible financial motivation. The forensic breakthrough. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mthembu's explosives, despite their professional application, contained trace elements that could be analyzed and potentially traced. Military-grade explosives have distinctive chemical signatures, and the composition found at the scene suggested a specific manufacturer and production batch. Working with military authorities, investigators traced the explosive components through a complex supply chain. The trail led to a construction company in Pretoria that had reported a small theft of demolition charges 6 months earlier. The timing was significant, but more importantly, the company's employment records revealed that Lucky Siboko had briefly worked there as a mechanic. Lucky Siboko became the investigation's first concrete lead. His background check revealed employment history with several cash-in-transit companies, mechanical expertise that matched the evidence at the crime scene, and financial pressures that provided clear motivation. More damaging still, his alibi for the night of the robbery was weak and contradicted by several witnesses. Surveillance of Siboko revealed behavior consistent with someone trying to avoid detection. He'd moved from his longtime residence in Soweto to a more upscale apartment in Santan, paid for with cash. His spending patterns had changed dramatically, including purchases that suggested access to significant amounts of money, despite his supposed unemployment. Following Siboko led investigators to the broader network. Bank records, carefully analyzed for unusual patterns, revealed financial connections between Siboko and 3 other individuals: Colin Chalk, Demba Ndlovu, and Johan Zembu. These connections were subtle: small cash transfers, shared expenses, coordinated timing of financial activities. But they painted a picture of 4 men whose lives had become financially intertwined in the months leading up to the robbery. Each of these individuals became subjects of intensive investigation. Background checks revealed capabilities that matched the evidence from the crime scene. Chalk's employment history with cash-in-transit companies provided the necessary inside knowledge. Ndlovu's electrical expertise explained the sophisticated power disruption. Thembu's military background accounted for the professional-grade explosives work. The walls close in. Detective Mogali authorized a comprehensive surveillance operation targeting all 4 suspects simultaneously. This required significant resources: teams of undercover officers, electronic monitoring equipment, and careful coordination to avoid detection. The operation, codenamed Golden Web, would run for 6 weeks with the goal of gathering enough evidence to secure convictions. The surveillance revealed a group of men trying desperately to appear normal, while managing the stress of having committed a major crime. Chalk had returned to his job at a different security company, but his performance was erratic and his behavior suggested someone under tremendous psychological pressure. Ndlovu had found employment as an electrician, but was making basic mistakes that suggested his mind was elsewhere. Most interesting was their pattern of avoiding each other. Despite evidence of their previous association, the 4 men seemed to have completely severed contact. This suggested both criminal sophistication and growing paranoia as the investigation intensified. Parallel to the surveillance operation, financial investigators were tracing the money. 14 million rand in cash doesn't disappear easily, and the investigation team believed that tracking its conversion into legitimate assets would provide the strongest evidence against the suspects. The financial trail was complex and sophisticated. Small amounts appeared in bank accounts opened with false documentation. Property purchases were made through shell companies with obscured ownership. Luxury items were purchased with cash from dealers who didn't ask questions. The conversion process showed the same careful planning that had characterized the robbery itself. However, the volume of money involved made complete concealment impossible. Over several months, patterns emerged that connected the suspects to various financial transactions. Real estate records showed properties purchased by entities that, through complex ownership structures, were controlled by the suspects. Vehicle registrations revealed expensive cars purchased with suspicious cash payments. As evidence accumulated, Detective Mogali authorized a pressure campaign designed to fracture the group's solidarity. Each suspect was brought in for questioning repeatedly, each time presented with slightly more evidence of their involvement. The strategy was to create anxiety about what the police knew and when arrests might occur. The campaign had its intended effect. Surveillance revealed increasing stress among the suspects. Ndlovu began drinking heavily and making mistakes at work. Sabako became increasingly paranoid, frequently checking for surveillance and avoiding his normal routines. Most significantly, enforced separation between group members created anxiety about whether others might be cooperating with police. The break in the case came from an unexpected source. Demba, Ndlovu's brother, Marcus, approached police with information about his brother's involvement in the robbery. Marcus had observed his brother's changed behavior, new wealth, and obvious stress. More importantly, Themba had confided in him during a drinking session, revealing details about the robbery that only someone with inside knowledge could know. Marcus agreed to wear a recording device during conversations with his brother. Over several weeks, he gathered evidence that definitively placed Themba at the scene of the crime and revealed details about the other crew members' roles. Recordings provided the foundation for arrest warrants against all 4 suspects. Coordinated arrests. The arrests were conducted simultaneously at dawn, preventing any suspect from warning the others. Detective Mogali led the team that arrested Colin Chalk at his girlfriend's apartment in Rudeport. The raid revealed carefully hidden cash totaling nearly 2 million rand, along with documentation that connected him to several property purchases made since the robbery. Chalk's arrest was almost anticlimactic. The man who had planned and executed one of South Africa's most sophisticated heists surrendered without resistance. As if relieved that the months of stress and paranoia were finally over, his first words to Detective Mogali were reportedly, "I suppose you want to know about the others." Lucky Saboko was arrested at his garage in Soweto, where investigators found tools and equipment that matched evidence from the crime scene. His modified Toyota Hilux, which he had believed destroyed, had left trace evidence in the garage that forensic specialists were able to match to debris found at the depot. The interrogation process revealed the true sophistication of the operation. Chalk, under pressure from overwhelming evidence and facing the possibility of life imprisonment, agreed to cooperate with investigators. His detailed confession provided a minute-by-minute account of the robbery and revealed the extent of their planning and preparation. Chalk's cooperation had a domino effect on the other suspects. Faced with his testimony and the physical evidence against them, Ndlovu and Saboko also agreed to cooperate. Only Mthembu maintained his innocence, but the combined testimony of his co-conspirators made his position untenable. The interrogations revealed not just the mechanics of the robbery, but the psychology of the conspirators. These were not hardened criminals, but ordinary men who had convinced themselves that their desperate circumstances justified extraordinary measures. Their detailed confessions showed both pride in their accomplishment and genuine remorse for their actions. With the suspects' cooperation, investigators were able to trace nearly 80% of the stolen money. The recovery process revealed the sophistication of their laundering operation, but also its ultimate futility. Property purchases, vehicle acquisitions, and luxury goods purchases had created a paper trail that, once identified, was impossible to conceal. Some money had been spent on family needs, medical bills, school fees, and basic living expenses that reflected the economic pressures that had motivated the crime. Other funds had been invested in legitimate businesses, suggesting that the conspirators had hoped to eventually legitimize their stolen wealth. The most significant recovery came from a storage facility in Kempton Park, where nearly 4 million rand in cash was found hidden in containers labeled as auto parts. This money had apparently been held in reserve while the conspirators waited for the investigation to cool down before attempting to launder it. The investigation's expansion revealed connections to a broader network of criminals and corrupt officials. The explosives had been supplied by a former military officer who had been selling surplus materials to criminal organizations. The false documentation used to open bank accounts had come from a sophisticated forgery operation based in Cape Town. Several cash-in-transit industry employees were identified as having provided information to the conspirators, either knowingly or unknowingly. These individuals faced disciplinary action and, in some cases, criminal charges for their roles in facilitating the robbery. Most significantly, the investigation revealed that the Fidelity robbery was not an isolated incident. Chalk and his associates had been planning additional robberies using similar methods. Police raids on their safe houses revealed detailed reconnaissance materials for 3 other cash-in-transit facilities, suggesting that the 14 million rand theft was intended to be just the beginning of a broader criminal campaign. Justice and consequences. The trial of the Fidelity Four, as they became known in media coverage, began in October 2007 at the Johannesburg High Court. The case attracted international attention as an example of how sophisticated criminal operations were evolving in post-apartheid South Africa. The prosecution, led by advocate Jennifer Makwana, presented a case that detailed not just the robbery itself, but the broader implications for South Africa's financial security. The evidence presented during the trial revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Hundreds of photographs, detailed financial records, recorded conversations, and physical evidence painted a picture of criminal planning that bordered on the academic in its thoroughness. Expert witnesses testified about the sophistication of the explosive devices, the complexity of the financial laundering operation, and the precision of the intelligence gathering that had made the robbery possible. The defense, led by prominent criminal attorney Dolly Mpofu, focused on the economic circumstances that had driven ordinary men to extraordinary crimes. They argued that the defendants were products of South Africa's economic inequality, men who had turned to crime not from greed, but from desperation. The defense presented evidence of the defendants' previously clean criminal records, their family responsibilities, and the limited economic opportunities available to them despite their skills and education. Character witnesses testified about their positive contributions to their communities and their roles as family providers. However, the sophistication of the planning and the scale of the theft made it difficult to portray the defendants as sympathetic figures. The prosecution successfully argued that this was not a crime of desperation, but a calculated criminal enterprise that had threatened the security of South Africa, its financial system. After 6 weeks of testimony and 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts against all 4 defendants on charges including robbery, conspiracy, and money laundering. The verdict was unanimous, and according to several jurors who spoke to the media afterward, was never seriously in doubt given the overwhelming evidence presented. The sentencing phase revealed the full impact of their crimes. Fidelity Security had suffered not just the direct loss of 14 million rand, but also additional costs for security upgrades, insurance premium increases, and reputational damage that affected their business relationships. The broader cash-in-transit industry had been forced to implement expensive security improvements that ultimately increased costs for all South Africans. Judge Maria Satchwell sentenced Colin Chalk to 25 years imprisonment. reflecting his role as the mastermind of the operation. Themba and Ndlovu received 20 years, Lucky Sibeko 18 years, and Johannes Mathembu 22 years. The sentences were among the harshest ever imposed for cash in transit robberies in South African history. The final accounting revealed that investigators had recovered approximately 11.2 million rand of the stolen money, an unusually high recovery rate for such crimes. However, the remaining 2.8 million rand was never found, leading to speculation that additional conspirators had escaped detection or that some money remained hidden. The recovered assets included 2 residential properties, 3 vehicles, and various luxury items that were sold at public auction. The proceeds were used to compensate Fidelity Security for their losses, though the total recovery never fully offset the company's costs from the robbery and its aftermath. Some family members of the convicted men attempted to claim ownership of recovered assets, arguing that they were legitimate purchases made with lawful income. However, the court ruled that the sophisticated money laundering operation made it impossible to distinguish between stolen funds and legitimate income, and all recovered assets were forfeited to the state. The legacy of the heist, the Fidelity robbery, became a watershed moment for South Africa's cash-in-transit industry. The sophisticated planning and execution exposed vulnerabilities that companies had never seriously considered. Within months of the robbery, industry-wide security upgrades were implemented, including improved electronic surveillance, enhanced physical barriers, and more sophisticated personnel screening procedures. The robbery also accelerated South Africa's transition toward electronic banking and digital payment systems. The risk and cost of transporting large amounts of cash became increasingly difficult to justify, leading to expanded ATM networks, mobile banking services, and electronic payment systems that reduced the need for cash-in-transit operations. Beyond the financial impact, the robbery had profound human consequences. The 4 men who had planned and executed the perfect crime found themselves serving lengthy prison sentences that effectively ended their productive adult lives. Their families, initially beneficiaries of the stolen wealth, became victims of the investigation and prosecution process. Colin Chalk, the mastermind, reportedly spent his early years in prison writing detailed accounts of the robbery and his motivations. These writings, obtained by journalists, revealed a man struggling to understand how his desperate circumstances had led him to plan and execute such an elaborate crime. Themba Ndlovu's cooperation with investigators had fractured relationships within his family and community. His brother Marcus, who had provided crucial evidence to police, was forced to relocate due to threats from criminal associates who viewed him as an informant. Despite the successful prosecution and significant asset recovery, several aspects of the case remain unexplained. The missing 2.8 million rand was never located, leading to persistent speculation about additional conspirators or hidden assets. Some investigators believe that the sophisticated money laundering operation revealed during the trial was only partially uncovered. The source of the inside information that made the robbery possible was never definitively established. While several cash-in-transit employees were identified as having possibly provided information, none were ever charged with criminal conspiracy. This suggests that the intelligence-gathering operation was even more sophisticated than revealed during the trial. Most intriguingly, evidence found during the investigation suggested that the Fidelity robbery was part of a broader criminal campaign. Plans for additional robberies were discovered, but the individuals involved in developing these plans were never identified. This has led to ongoing concerns about other criminal organizations using similar methodologies. The Fidelity robbery highlighted broader issues within South African society that extended far beyond criminal activity. The defendants' backgrounds revealed the limited economic opportunities available to skilled individuals from disadvantaged communities. Their ability to plan and execute such a sophisticated operation demonstrated capabilities that, under different circumstances, might have been channeled into legitimate enterprises. The case also revealed the vulnerability of financial infrastructure in developing economies. The heavy reliance on cash transactions, combined with limited electronic banking infrastructure, created opportunities for criminal activity that more developed economies had largely eliminated through technological advancement. The final reckoning. Today, more than 15 years after the robbery, the Fidelity heist remains a defining case study in South African criminal justice. It demonstrated both the sophistication of modern criminal operations and the effectiveness of comprehensive police investigation when properly resourced and executed. The case established precedents for financial crime investigation that continue to influence how such cases are prosecuted. The methods used to trace and recover stolen assets became models for subsequent investigations. While the sentences imposed sent clear messages about the consequences of sophisticated financial crimes, for Detective Captain Sarah Mogali, who led the investigation, the case represented the pinnacle of her career. Her methodical approach to evidence gathering and her strategic use of surveillance and financial investigation became required study material for detectives across South Africa. The Fidelity for remain in prison, their elaborate plan having ultimately failed, not because of its execution, but because of the fundamental impossibility of completely erasing the traces of such a large-scale operation. Their story serves as both a testament to human ingenuity and a reminder that even the most carefully planned crimes ultimately leave evidence that determined investigators can follow to their inevitable conclusion. In the end, the perfect crime proved to be perfectly flawed, undone not by a single mistake, but by the accumulated weight of hundreds of small decisions that, individually innocuous, collectively painted an unmistakable picture of guilt. The cash-in-transit heist that was meant to solve their problems became the source of consequences that would define the remainder of their lives. The ripple effects continue. Within 18 months of the Fidelity robbery, South African police documented a disturbing trend: the emergence of increasingly sophisticated cash-in-transit robberies that bore striking similarities to the Fidelity operation. Criminal organizations had studied the case files, media coverage, and court proceedings to develop their own versions of the successful methodology. The most brazen copycat attempt occurred in Cape Town in 2008, where a four-man crew attempted to replicate the Fidelity robbery almost exactly. However, their lack of the original crew's meticulous preparation and inside knowledge led to disaster. The robbery failed when their explosives breached not just the vault door, but an adjacent wall, triggering a structural collapse that trapped two of the perpetrators inside. One died from his injuries, while the other was arrested at the scene. This failed copycat attempt revealed a crucial aspect of the original Fidelity robbery that had been underestimated. The months of technical preparation and intelligence gathering that had made success possible, without Chalk's systematic approach and the crew's specific expertise, similar operations were doomed to failure. The Fidelity case fundamentally changed how South African law enforcement approached organized crime investigation. The success of Detective Mogali's comprehensive approach, combining financial investigation, electronic surveillance, traditional detective work, became the template for major crime investigations across the country. A specialized unit, the Financial Crimes Investigation Division, was established within the South African Police Service specifically to handle sophisticated financial crimes. The unit's training program used the Fidelity case as its primary teaching tool, analyzing every aspect of both the crime and the investigation to prepare detectives for similar challenges. The unit's first major success came in 2009 with the prevention of a planned armored car robbery in Durban. Intelligence gathered through methods pioneered during the Fidelity investigation allowed police to arrest the perpetrators during their final reconnaissance phase. Before any crime had been committed, the prevented robbery would have targeted over 20 million rand, making it potentially larger than the Fidelity heist. The technology arms race. The cash-in-transit industry's response to the Fidelity robbery sparked a technological arms race between security companies and criminal organizations. GPS tracking systems became standard on all armored vehicles, making it possible to monitor their locations in real time and detect any deviations from planned routes. More sophisticated alarm systems were installed in cash processing facilities, with redundant power supplies and cellular communication backups that eliminated the vulnerabilities exploited in the Fidelity robbery. Biometric access controls replaced traditional security measures, making it virtually impossible for unauthorized individuals to gain entry to sensitive areas. However, these security improvements came at enormous cost. Industry estimates suggested that security upgrades implemented in response to the Fidelity robbery increased operational costs by over 300% for many companies. These costs were ultimately passed on to consumers in the form of higher banking fees and reduced services in rural areas, where cash-in-transit operations became economically unviable. The academic study. The Fidelity robbery became the subject of extensive academic study. Criminologists, sociologists, and economists analyzing various aspects of the case. The University of the Witwatersrand established a research program dedicated to studying sophisticated financial crimes, using the Fidelity case as its foundational research. Dr. Amanda Kruger, who led the research program, published a comprehensive analysis titled The Perfect Crime: Economic Desperation and Criminal Innovation in Post-Apartheid South Africa. Her work explored how economic inequality and limited opportunities had created conditions where skilled individuals turned to sophisticated criminal enterprises. The research revealed disturbing parallels between the Fidelity conspirators and other individuals in similar economic circumstances. Surveys conducted in townships across South Africa found that significant percentages of skilled but unemployed individuals had considered participating in criminal activities to address their economic circumstances. Life in prison proved particularly challenging for the Fidelity Four, whose sophisticated crime had earned them recognition within the criminal community, while simultaneously making them targets for both admiration and exploitation. Colin Chalk, the mastermind, found himself sought after by other prisoners seeking advice on planning criminal operations. Chalk initially resisted these approaches, but eventually began offering educational programs for prisoners interested in legitimate business planning. His detailed knowledge of security systems and operational planning, gained through his criminal activities, proved valuable for teaching legal entrepreneurship and business development. Then Benedlo Vu struggled more significantly with prison life. His electrical expertise made him valuable for prison maintenance operations. But his cooperation with police during the investigation marked him as an informant among certain prisoner populations. He spent his first 3 years in protective custody before the situation stabilized. Lucky Saboko adapted to prison life by establishing an automotive repair program that taught mechanical skills to other prisoners. The program became so successful that it was expanded to other facilities, with Saboko eventually becoming a certified instructor despite his incarceration. Johannes Mithmo, the former military operative, found purpose in organizing educational programs for young offenders. His military discipline and leadership skills made him effective at mentoring prisoners who reminded him of his younger self during the anti-apartheid struggle. The impact on the families of the Fidelity Four revealed another dimension of the crime's consequences. Spouses and children who had briefly enjoyed the benefits of stolen wealth found themselves stigmatized by association with the high-profile crime. Cox's girlfriend, who had known nothing about his criminal activities, discovered her apartment filled with police officers during his arrest. The 2 million rand found in her home was confiscated, leaving her with nothing but suspicion about her potential involvement. Though never charged with any crime, she found employment difficult to obtain due to her association with the case. The children of the conspirators faced particular challenges. Sudden changes in family financial circumstances, from brief wealth to poverty and social stigma, created psychological trauma that required years of counseling and support. Several children were forced to change schools due to harassment from classmates who recognized their connection to the famous crime. Some family members attempted to maintain contact with the imprisoned men, but the financial burden of prison visits and the social stigma of association made this increasingly difficult. By 2010, 3 years after the arrests, only Nedlovu and Saiboko maintained regular family contact. The ongoing investigations, despite the successful prosecution of the Fidelity Four, several aspects of the case remained under investigation years later. The sophisticated money laundering operation, revealed during the trial, suggested connections to broader criminal networks that extended beyond the immediate conspirators. In 2011, a joint investigation by South African and international law enforcement agencies traced some of the laundering techniques used in the Fidelity case to a Cape town-based organization that provided financial services to criminal enterprises across southern Africa. This investigation, codenamed Operation Clean Slate, resulted in over 30 arrests and the seizure of assets worth more than 200 million rand. The investigation revealed that the Fidelity conspirators had unknowingly accessed services provided by this larger criminal organization, suggesting that their sophisticated money laundering operation was not entirely self-developed. This discovery raised questions about whether other aspects of their operation had received similar external support. The Fidelity case influenced significant changes in South African financial crime legislation. The Prevention of Organized Crime Act was amended to include specific provisions targeting the type of sophisticated planning and intelligence gathering that had made the robbery possible. New regulations required cash-in-transit companies to implement standardized security protocols and to report any security breaches or unusual incidents to a central database. This information sharing was designed to identify patterns that might indicate criminal reconnaissance activities. The Financial Intelligence Center Act was expanded to include lower reporting thresholds for cash transactions, making it more difficult for criminals to convert large amounts of stolen cash into legitimate assets without detection. These changes were directly influenced by the money laundering techniques revealed during the Fidelity investigation. It's the international impact. The sophistication of the Fidelity robbery attracted attention from international law enforcement agencies studying evolving criminal methodologies. Interpol used the case as a training example for police forces in developing countries facing similar challenges with cash-in-transit security. The case was featured prominently at international conferences on organized crime, where South African investigators shared their experiences and methodologies with counterparts from other countries. The financial investigation techniques developed during the case were adopted by law enforcement agencies in several African countries facing similar criminal challenges. The current status: as of 2024, 3 of the Fidelity 4 remain in prison. With Colin Chalk scheduled for parole consideration in 2027, Themba and Lavu was released in 2021 after serving 14 years. Having earned early release through good behavior and participation in prison educational programs, Ndlovu's release was controversial, with some law enforcement officials arguing that his cooperation during the investigation should have resulted in a reduced sentence from the beginning. However, victims' rights organizations opposed his early release, arguing that the severity of the crime justified the full sentence regardless of cooperation. Since his release, Ndlovu has struggled to find employment due to his criminal record and the high-profile nature of his crime. He's been working with ex-offender support organizations to develop programs for other released prisoners facing similar challenges. The missing 2.8 million rand was never recovered. An active investigation into its whereabouts officially ended in 2018. However, some investigators believe that this money may surface eventually, either through criminal associates attempting to access it or through discovery during unrelated investigations. The final lesson: Fidelity cash-in-transit. Heist ultimately serves as a comprehensive case study in the evolution of crime in modern South Africa. It demonstrates how economic inequality, technological capability, and criminal opportunity can combine to create sophisticated criminal enterprises that challenge traditional law enforcement approaches. The case also illustrates the ultimate futility of even the most carefully planned crimes. Despite months of meticulous preparation and successful execution, the Fidelity 4 were undone by the same systematic approach that had made their crime possible. Their detailed planning created extensive evidence trails that determined investigators were able to follow to their inevitable conclusion. Perhaps most significantly, the case reveals how individual criminal acts can have profound and lasting impacts on entire industries, communities, and families. The Fidelity robbery changed not just the lives of its perpetrators, but the security practices of an entire industry, the investigative techniques of law enforcement, and the financial landscape of South Africa itself. The story of the Fidelity 4 continues to resonate because it represents both the promise and the peril of human ingenuity. Their crime demonstrated remarkable technical skill, careful planning, and successful execution, qualities that, under different circumstances, might have been channeled into legitimate success. Instead, their story serves as a cautionary tale about the ultimate consequences of choosing criminal solutions to legitimate problems. In the annals of South African criminal history, the Fidelity cash-in-transit heist stands as a watershed moment that divided the era of opportunistic crime from the age of sophisticated criminal enterprise. Its legacy continues to influence how crimes are planned, investigated, and prevented, ensuring that the lessons learned from this perfect crime continued to shape the ongoing battle between criminal innovation and law enforcement response. Subscribe for this and many more stories.